Hi guys, hi, how's it going? How are you doing today? Hopefully today finds you well. Today I am doing my next palette roulette video in which I review a palette that is in my collection that might also be in your collection. I tell you about the good, the bad, the ugly, show you some swatches of the palette, and then we pick another palette and do it all over again. I hope that sounds like something you're interested in. Today I'm actually reviewing 3 palettes, so grab a snack. I promise it's not going to be an hour and a half long. With that said, for those of you new here, hi, my name is Donna. I'm a lover of all things high and colorful beauty and self-care. I also work in the beauty industry as a field leader for Ulta Beauty. I get a lot of education in my position. I like to bring you that education here. Ultimately, I'm just here talking about makeup because I like to talk about makeup. I hope that you do too. If you didn't, you wouldn't be here. I'm certain of it. So I hope that we can be friends at the end of the day. I hope that you'll want to subscribe before you go. And let's just roll into this palette review and talk about some makeup. Today, we are going to be reviewing these 3 palettes here. So last time when I picked the palettes, these were the 2 that I picked. The Natasha Denona Xenon palette and the Plain Jane palette by Adept Cosmetics. I did roll in this one as well because I wanted, number one, for it to live in a palette roulette, but also I found that I needed more than just grayscale. And I think that you all probably knew that was going to be the case, right? So let's talk about the Xenon palette first. I think that this is probably the one that you guys came for anyways. So this one is the Natasha Denona Xenon palette. And this palette comes in at $69 on the Natasha Denona website or Ulta. I did not see this at Sephora. I think this might have been an Ulta exclusive. This is 0.64 ounces of product or 0.043 ounces per pan. This is one of her 15 pan midi palettes, so you are still getting 15 pounds of powder in here. The component just looks like the night sky. It's black with silver specks of glitter on it. Natasha Denona Xenon palette is written down here. It is not raised or anything. It's all flush with the palette. There's no like special like 3D effect with this palette like there was with like I Need a Nude or the Retro Glam, I believe it was. It does show fingerprints so easily because of the black glossiness of the packaging. The back of the package does have the holes in it for you to be able to pop out the shades and move around the shades in any midi size palette that you want to, as with every other one of her midis as well, and her large size pans. You can move around all those shadows. Of course, there's the sticker on the back that says that, you know, it has a 24-month shelf life, that it is cruelty-free, paraben, mineral oil-free, and made in Italy. The inside of the packaging does have a nice mirror in it, which I have not taken the frosted sticker off of it, and this is the inside of the palette. There are 15 shades in here, as I said. 6 of them are high shine metallics, 4 are mattes. There is 1 cream to powder in here, 3 sparkling foils, and 1 sparkling wet effect. This is the signature smoky eyeshadow palette for a smoky eye. And it's really inspired by the success of the Mini Xenon palette. We do have that 5-pan Mini Xenon that she came out with prior to this palette. Usually it works the other way around. Because that was so heavily talked about and really popular palette, she did decide to make a 15-pan midi size eyeshadow palette with that. This is what Natasha states is the Edgy Glam Essential, and it was for holiday 2023, so it is a relatively new palette. This does have a 4.9 star rating on Natasha Denona's website with almost 500 reviews. There are 489 reviews. It is a 4.9 star rating on Ulta Beauty with 396 reviews and a 4.6 star rating on Google with 270 reviews, and it is supposed to be limited edition. Now, I did some classes and I found out that limited edition doesn't necessarily mean here and gone. It just typically means it will be in production for 2 years or less, and then they will pull it, typically. That's not necessarily the case with Natasha Denona all the time. I've seen some of her limited edition palettes stay for much longer than those 2 years. This is a sultry, cool-toned, grayscale kind of palette. There are pops of pink and blue in here, and I think it's kind of comical because I can flat out see the pop of blue here and the pop of pink here in my monitor. Looking at it head on, you can kind of see it, and this one also kind of sways a little bit pink. On an eye look though, for many a creator out in the YouTube space, there wasn't a whole lot of them out there that was like, I can see the blue, I can see the pink. I can. And I can honestly see it on my face as well. When I put an eye look together with this palette, 9 times out of 10, it swayed very blue versus black. I do think that you can get a decent amount of variety out of this palette, but also I pulled in another palette because I wasn't getting enough variety out of this palette. And the fact that there are only 4 mattes in this whole 15 pan eyeshadow palette, you guys have heard me say this before. I do prefer a 50-50 matte to shimmer ratio in my palettes, if not like 60-40 matte to shimmer. And this one definitely has more of a 40-60. And therefore I found myself wanting to pull from a whole nother palette. And I think it was honestly a mistake to partner this one with it because this one is all shimmer. So I gave myself 4 whole mattes and all the shimmer in the world to work with over the last several weeks. So it was inevitable that I was going to pull in another palette. Am I glad it was this one? Yeah. This is where this eye look comes from today, just in case you were wondering. I would say that this is a really pretty palette, and Natasha Denona makes her palettes set up in a way where you could work across or up and down or in a like little quad or a 9 pan to gain a whole look. And there are plenty of mattes in, you know, each section. There's also the cream to powder, which is Sposh, which is this one here. So this row doesn't have any like straight up creamy mattes, but it does have Sposh, which is the cream to powder, which functions much like a matte in an eye look. I found that every single one of these shadows was beautiful. They worked beautifully. I enjoyed having them. I used this one so much as a brow bone highlight or inner corner. I'm surprised that there's not a bigger dip in there. I also think that this one was really pretty, but this one is the sparkling wet effect, and it is just a little bit more sheer than I preferred for like a silver in my eye look, but still very, very beautiful. I think that you could get a decent amount of wear time and pigmentation without a primer. I've said that before about Natasha Denona in the past. You're going to see the same performance with or without a primer on this. Wear time, literally days. And I only say that because while this was in rotation, I did fall asleep on the couch a few times or go to bed and not have anything on my face but eye makeup and decide that I would just get up the next morning and wash it. And I know I'm a disgusting human being, but I did that. And I went to the next day into calls with this eye makeup on, and it looked like I had just applied it. I did use an eye primer most days when I was utilizing this palette, but I also have used this shadow palette without eye primers, and it works just fine. I think that the performance is just as good. So with that said, do I think that you need to own this palette? I think that honestly, this wasn't necessarily a big mistake for me in 2023 to purchase, but this is a palette I firmly feel if you have the mini Xenon, you probably don't need this. This is going to give you a couple more, you know, out of the box kind of thinking shimmers than what the mini Xenon did. It's going to give you that sparkling wet effect. It's going to give you some sparkling foils. It gives you a little bit of a taupey, a little bit of a pinky, a little bit of a blue. But do you have those already in your palette collection? Probably. I would venture to say I do. And I would also venture to say that this was probably not a palette that I needed to bring in my collection. Am I happy I have it? Yes. I do think that every single eye look I got from this was beautiful. And like I said, I really, really hung on to this being a really, really great inner corner or brow bone shade. And this is a really beautiful matte shade that kind of leans a little bit gray, so it's not stark. So it really kind of blended into every single eyeshadow look that I had going on. I just don't think that this is going to see a whole lot of usage in anybody's collection unless it's like party time. This does partner very well with any other eyeshadow palette that I have though, or the ones that I was using anyways. I think that these shimmers work really well with the shimmers in the Plain Jane palette. These shimmers worked really well with themselves. The mattes worked really well with themselves. I didn't struggle with this palette at all. And I do think that it leans kind of on the blue end of the gray spectrum. This gray here showed up very kind of like gray toned baby blue. This one here was definitely a midnight blue shade for me. This black here was actually very, very blue. I did a halo eye with both of these colors in it. And it was a very blue halo eye with a gray ribbon around it. I love that there is a couple of more leaning taupey shades here, one of them being a matte and one of them being a shimmer, so that you could get a different kind of eye look out of this palette than the grayscale. But I just think that I found myself getting really, really bored with it because it was so one-noted for the most part. Now, I do have swatches of this palette because I wasn't going to come to you and live swatch, 40 something eyeshadows. That would just take too long and I don't want to have you guys here. So for an hour and a half. So I'm going to put up the swatches that I have of this palette right now. I do have it from this shade here across and then down this shade here across and then down this shade here across. So we have Rhyme, which is a metallic white. We have Cygnus, which is a sparkling foiled anthracite. Now this is more of like I would say a charcoal with some really beautiful like silver shimmers in it. And then we have Stellar, which is your sparkling wet effect white. Really pretty shade. Worked best as a topper. It really didn't have a whole lot of pigmentation behind it. Blizzard is a matte light gray. It does, like I said, have a little bit of a blue kick to it, especially when using with Ebb or Night Sky. Then we have Gru, which is a sparkling metallic iron gray. And then we have Ebb, which is a metallic midnight blue. I do think that you can see that it looks very midnight blue here. I definitely can see it. I hope that you can too. Then we have Super Ionic, which is a sparkling foiled silver with multicolored specks. I did partner it with the My Dream palette a couple times and it just brought out a totally different color than I was expecting from this shade. Then we have Sposh, which is a cream to powder charcoal. This one actually performed quite well. It was one of those cream to powder shades that I fell in love with through Metropolis, which I felt like were some of her better cream to powder formulated shades. Then we have Snowbow, which is a crystal sparkling pink with multicolored specs. I really do think that it had a really nice pink undertone to it that showed up quite well in any eye look I put it into. Then we have Night Sky, which is a metallic black. Then we have Contrail, which is a matte white. Like I said, one of my favorites to use, probably most used in the entire time I was utilizing this palette. Then we have Snert, which is a matte medium gray. It is actually a matte deep gray. I think that you all know, especially if you've been around for a long time, a lot of Natasha Denona's shadows show up almost true to pan on the eye in first swatch. I do think that this one shows up a little bit deeper on an eye look than it does in the pan. Then we have, I think it's Neve. It is a sparkling metallic peony pink. I don't think that this one is super pink. I know that it says it is, but I don't think that it is. I think the one on the end is more pink than this one, but this is still a beautiful shadow. Really, really impactful in an eye look. Then we have Flurry, which is a matte eggshell. I did use this one quite often as well. And Skift, which is a sparkling foiled light medium champagne. And this is the one that I think looks a little bit more pink than Neve, even though Neve supposedly is a peony pink. I just don't think that that shade specifically has any pink in it. Maybe pink sparkles, it can, maybe with a purple, lean a little bit on the pink side, but I think that's just the nature of the beast. I am appreciative that this exists. I do think that this is a beautiful palette. I just don't think it's one that you need if you have a lot of blacks or grays in your palette collection. I also don't think that this is one that you need if you have the mini Xenon. I think that every look that I did with this palette, for the most part, I could pull out of that 5-pan mini almost as easily, if not easier, than I pulled out of this palette. I do love, like I said, that it has a little bit of blue and a little kick of pink that goes along with it. But I just don't think that you need to spend $69 on this palette if you have any amount of blacks and grays in your palette collection. The next one I have is the Natasha Denona My Dream palette. And this one I brought into my collection when it first launched. I picked up the entire launch. So why is it just now floating into my palette roulette? I can tell you. It's because I did a get ready with me on this palette and then put it away and forgot that I had not done a review on it, which I try and do prior to putting my palettes into my regular collection. So I pulled it out, decided to play with it a little bit more, and got some use out of every single shade in here versus only the like 3 or 4 that I had used in my get ready with me, and here we are. So in addition to that, it has some really beautiful pinks and corals, burgundies, and really deep purples, which I thought partnered really, really well with the Xenon palette. This is very, of course, one-noted, and this has a little bit of everything, but they partner very, very well together. I needed some more mattes. I needed some browns. I needed some corals. I needed more mattes. So with that said, this is also a $69 Natasha Denona midi-size palette. This is what the front of the palette looks like. And what I think is awesome about this palette is that this cartridge was 100% hand designed by Natasha. And this writing right here is her own handwriting. So that's really cool. What I also love about it, honestly, is something that everybody else on this platform really hates. And it is the paint splotchiness of it. Like, I have heard so many people review this palette and talk about how they hated the component of the packaging because of the paint splotchiness. But when I was a kid, I lived with my grandparents and they let me do my room however I wanted to. And I did paint splatters. I think that the paint splatters is just representative of an era that we grew up in. Like, I am 47. Natasha is a little over 50, if I remember right. I think she's somewhere around 52, 53. So we're not that far apart in age. And I know that this was something that was a hot thing when I was young. So maybe it also was when she was young. I think it also speaks to the creative mindset of trust the process. And I don't know that that's what she was thinking, you guys. That's just my thought process. But I personally love the packaging of this palette. I think that the peach color of it is so beautiful. It's more like kind of a nude shadow or nude shade, but I feel like it leans very peach heavy. And then of course the back is set up in a way that you can pop out the pans of this palette just like every one of her other middies. It has the sticker that states that it's cruelty free, paraben free, mineral oil free, and made in Italy with a 24-month shelf life. It also has a nice size mirror on it, and this is what the shadows look like out of this palette. So you can see that this is also 15 pans, $69 eyeshadow palette, 0.67 ounces or just about 0.05 ounces per pan. There are 6 mattes in this one, 1 duochrome, 3 metallics, 2 cream to powders, 2 sparkling duochromes, and 1 multichrome. And this is Natasha's favorite eyeshadows in shades that are inspired by elements of life that illuminate and intensify her creative visions. This is also the eyeshadow palette that is on my eyes today. And this is the eyeshadow palette that I brought in to supplement for some of the mattes that I felt like I was missing with Xenon. I really do feel like this is a beautiful eyeshadow palette, and I think that it follows along with all the same things that I said about the previous one and that I've said about Natasha Denona in the past. There are 13 new shades in this eyeshadow palette. One not new is Black is Black. Black is Black is an eyeshadow that typically comes in a single pot. It hadn't prior to Mini Xenon ever come in a palette. It was in the palette, as you can see here, but it did not have a number on it. This is the first time that Black is Black has shown up in a palette and had a number attached to it. Natasha Denona's shades all have numbers attached to them as they're in a palette, and that way you can also tell which ones are from previous palettes and which ones are not. Serenity, numbered 114DC, is from a previous eyeshadow palette. This one is from the Star palette, 114DC, and the Star palette was called Supernova. DC is duochrome. I do think the one in Supernova was a little bit more duochrome, and this one is a lot more not duochrome, but pretty much same shadow at the end of the day. The duochrome and the Supernova shadow did not show up on the eyes, just like it doesn't with this one. I just think that they just called it different because it is the same shadow, but we realize it's not really a duochrome at the end of the day. And you will see that in the swatches, I do think. So anyways, that one came from the Star palette. Every other shade in here is a new to this palette shade and has the numbers between 440 and 452. This was the perfect complement, I feel like, to the Xenon palette because it was those cool tones that Xenon also was, with slight pops of peachiness and slight pops of like burgundies and purples that really gave me what I needed to make Xenon feel a little less one-noted. This is the only palette on my eyes today, except for the inner corner, which is a Denona Myrick shadow from her Experience palette. Other than that, that's it. This is it. I really would venture to say that this could be my perfect one and done eyeshadow palette as well. This does have 4.8 stars on Natasha Denona with 159 reviews, which kind of shocked me because typically there's a lot more reviews on her eyeshadow palettes than that, especially on her own website. It does have a 4.7 star at Ulta with 158 reviews, a 4.7 star at Sephora with 355 reviews, so obviously it lived over there much longer, and then a 4.6 star on Google. I do think that they got the ranking for this one pretty spot on. I would say 4.7, 4.8 stars. I do think that their rating for this one was slightly skewed. I do think that Google maybe got it right with 4.6 because I mean, it's very one-noted, and I got very bored with it. So it would not take a regular Joe Blow very long to get bored with that palette or not like it at all. So let's look at the swatches of these shadows. As I said, I didn't want to come to you and live swatch 42 eyeshadows. So you are looking at now a picture of all of these swatched out. So we have Black is Black, which is a matte intense black. And then we have Aspiration, which is a matte dark penny brown. We have Serenity, which is interesting because in this palette it is noted as a satin medium cool brown, whereas in Star it's listed as a duochrome. And then we have Carpe Diem, which is a matte medium dusty peach. We have Babies, a metallic light medium rosy nude. Instinct, a cream to powder medium fuchsia. We have Thrill, which is a sparkling metallic golden nude duochrome with a pink shift. I will tell you that I just don't think that this is a duochrome. Unity, which is a matte medium light pink nude. We have Risk, which is a metallic medium maroon. We have Invention, another sparkling metallic tangerine duochrome to bronze and gold. Then we have Vision, which is a multi-chrome metallic. These are the multi-chromes that everybody wanted from her in her trio chrome palette that didn't just exist, but man, she sure has stepped up the game. I definitely appreciate that. Then we have Edgy, which is the cream to powder eggplant purple. We have Spontaneous, which is a metallic light pearl nude, one of my favorites in the palette. Another one of my favorites in the palette was Nurture. This is a medium matte cool nude. Then we have Familia, which is a matte medium caramel brown. These 4 eyeshadows are what's in my look today. And this leans very, very orangey. And I think that you can see my eye look leans very, very red orange than it does like kind of brown. So this I don't think is a brown. I think it's like a rust orange. I really do love the palette. I think that the palette is beautiful and I am really happy to have it in my collection and really happy I finally got some use out of it. Now moving right along to Adept. Adept Cosmetics Plain Jane palette. I have the remastered palette. And I know this, even though it doesn't say remastered on it, which is how the original remastered palettes came out. The original Plain Jane palette was in a like cardboard component with like raised roses on it, I do believe, and it said Plain Jane. It was black. This is a very beautiful metallic pink, I would say like rose gold pink. Packaging reminds me a little bit of old school Natasha Denona in that it's faux leather wrapped all the way around. The only difference is this is not foam. This is definitely a cardboard base, which is fantastic. It does have a really nice mirror on it, and this is a metal like plate that says Plain Jane on it. It doesn't say Plain Jane Remastered. Much to my dismay, this palette I cannot find anymore at all for sale except for through resellers. Now these resellers are going to try to convince you through your FOMO that this palette is worth $120, $160. Do not pay that price for this palette. While I do believe that this palette is beautiful, I also do not believe that this palette is worth $160. I bought this palette with a bundle deal, right? So I got an Ninhindra in this palette and then an Adept magnetic palette. So I got like 20% off of my bundle. So I didn't pay the full price for this palette, but it is a $65 eyeshadow palette. I do think it's worth $65, but I also think that all of these shadows in here you can find on the Adept Cosmetics website. Maybe not in this palette and maybe not this exact shadow, but something similar to it in the Adept Cosmetics lineup. Don't pay $120 for this eyeshadow palette. Certainly don't do it if it's used, because there's a couple of them out there that are $100 that are used. I think that this is a different formula than Ninhindra, and I'm not sure. I didn't look that deep into it because I can't, because it's not on the Adept website anymore, and that's the only place that you could pick this up. But the reason why I think that is because these shadows, stunning and beautiful, same beautiful impact that Ninhindra had in an eye look, do not bother my eyes like Ninhindra did. They're not nearly as flaky as Ninhindra, and they pick up super easy with a brush, whereas Ninhindra did not. So I do think that this is a completely different formulation. And I know in terms of Plain Jane to Plain Jane Remastered, this is a different formulation for some of these shadows, but 7 of the shadows in here are the same as the regular plain Jane. I do think that these 3 are new, and I think that these 2 are new, but the rest of them came in the old plain Jane palette as well. The pans in this one are smaller than the original plain Jane palette as well. These are definitely less flaky than Ninhydrin. They're easier to pick up on a brush, like I said. I can only get these to work for me when I'm using a primer underneath them. Yes, they're beautiful. Yes, they go onto my lid, but they're just, I don't know, emollient enough that they do kind of crease in an eye look if I'm not putting a sticky tacky base underneath them. They also do fall out a smidge bit all over the place if I'm not putting a sticky tacky base underneath them. But if I am, I can go to good 6, 7, 8 hours of wear time out of these shadows. Whereas with Ninhydrin, I was pulling those things off my eyes at like 4 hours in because they were bothering me so much. I really can't bring you a whole lot of information as far as the ins and outs of how it was made or what the shadows, you know, what they're supposed to be and what they're not, because they're no longer on the Adept website. But I will show you the swatches that I have and discuss with you. And we're going to go straight across and then straight across and then straight across again. They don't have names, so we're just going to call them this one, that one, the next. So the first shadow is one that I found had a little bit of staining to it. It is a beautiful like maroon to gold to green like multi-chrome. It is so pretty. The next one does have a little bit of duochromatic to it. I think it's kind of like that bronzy, almost dingy brown to like this really beautiful Mars red duochrome about it, but it is also super, super pretty, very, very impactful in an eye look. This one I didn't find stained. And the next one is a really beautiful like green to gold, almost kind of like a turquoisey multi-chrome effect. Very light shadow, has very little base color to it, so it almost looks like you're wearing nothing straight on, and then as you turn, it's just like bam, color in your face. The next one is one of my favorite shadows in the palette, and it feels a little bit different than a lot of the other shadows in this palette does. This one is supposedly the first one in this palette that is from the old school plain Jane palette as well. I love this shadow. It's got a pink base with a little bit of a coral kick to it. Such a beautiful shadow and an eye look. It just feels a little bit different. The next one also came from the old plain Jane packaging. It's like a pink to gold shift in this one. Really beautiful in an eye look. Definitely a beautiful duochrome. And then we have the last one that also supposedly came from the original plain Jane palette. I do think that this one I struggled to show up in an eye look at first, but I think what I really recognized was the problem is that it has an almost transparent like pinky base to it, but such a beautiful bright blue duochrome shift to it. So second row, we have one that also came in plain Jane. It's a very like baby pink base duochrome that kind of has a silver flip. Then we have the next one, which was one of my favorites. It's a beautiful like blue to violet duochrome. I don't know that it is multi-chrome, but it does have a little bit of a hollow effect to it because it also has a transparent base, so it could be very multi-chromatic. The next one has again kind of a hollow look to it because it has more of a transparent base. It's definitely got like an olive green to a bright lime green duochrome to it, maybe even a smidge of red in there. Then we have this one, which feels a lot like Solaris in the Denona Myricks Experience palette, the one that is in my inner corner in this eye look. And it is a beautiful like gold to green to orange, almost red, like creamy, really, really creamy shadow. Then we have this purple, which is more of like a fuchsia to blue to purple multi-chrome. And then we have another one that is really creamy and it is a really beautiful multi-chrome. So the white one and this one feel exactly the same, like a little bit oil based maybe in the pan. These feel the exact same, and this is a multi-chrome that is stunning in an eye look. I could not be happier with these shades, and I'm so excited that they didn't bother me as much as the Ninhindran palette did, because I really, really loved these eyeshadows. In a nutshell, I would probably, if I was thinking about repurchasing any of these palettes, I do think that I would repurchase the Plain Jane palette. This is beautiful, and I had a really good time with it, and I'm really thankful that it has a completely different formulation, or at least didn't bother my eyes as much as the Ninhindran palette did. And I do think that these would come into my collection simply because of my Natasha Denona collection mentality, at least for this one. This one I do think I would have purchased. This one, I'm not sorry I purchased, but I don't think that you need it. If you have any blend of navy blues, grays, and blacks in your collection, you've got this palette over and over again. If you have the mini Xenon, you don't need that palette. So with that said, I'm going to go pick another palette. I'll be right back. Okay, in the spirit of Valentine's Day upcoming, I'm going to pull these two palettes in. Yes, another Natasha Denona, but this is a Natasha Denona face palette. So not only will I be reviewing the 5 eyeshadows in here, but also the blush and the highlighter that's in here. And I've heard good and bad, but really most excitingly, I am going to be reviewing this Mothership by Pat McGrath. And I know everybody has reviewed this palette or used this palette. I know I am late on the takedown, okay? But this is the Mothership 5 Bronze Seduction. This has been on and off my wish list for a very, very long time. And I was like, no, I don't need it. Yes, I need it. But I really do think that this is appropriate to bring in for Valentine's Day. Like, this purple excites me. This red excites me. And I do think that it will partner well with the Love palette as well. So these are the 2 palettes that I'm going to bring into rotation for the next update. I'm only doing 2. So we'll be reviewing 15 eyeshadows, a blush, and a highlight next time. And that feels a lot better than 42 eyeshadows, to be honest. So I hope that you guys are in for it. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. I hope that you and yours are well, that you're healthy and getting along as best that you can. I hope that you are all loving each other, but loving each other from afar. And until next time, bye friends.